Hello and welcome to this Affinity Photo tutorial. My name is Carl Surrey, and in this new video I want to just look at some common errors or mistakes that people make. Now, I see these sort of questions repeatedly come up over the years in Facebook groups or in the Serif forum or some other places. They're normally by new users of Affinity Photo, but not always. So it's just really a quick look at some of the things that seem to trip people up quite often. Now, I'm doing this in Affinity Photo 2, but pretty much all these things will be the same in Affinity Photo 1. Some menus have changed and icons have looked different, but it's basically everything will be the same. Now, the first common mistake what I want to cover is making selections using the selection brush tool, which you can get by pressing W on the keyboard or by clicking this icon up here in the left hand tools bar. Now, when I click on this, you get the brush circle, and if I sort of just click and drag, it will make a selection, and the more I click and drag, it will continue to make a selection. But it does make it hard when you sort of want to get the sky area, and this is down to the fact that there is just a single tick missing. Now, in this bar that runs along the top of the screen here, you have a button, more of a tick space for snap to edges. So let me just press Ctrl and D to get rid of that selection, and if I put a tick into snap to edges and then I just click and drag, it should start selecting a larger area, and it has pretty much done the whole of the sky area that I want to get. And if I zoom in, there's a few bits here that I would need to be doing sort of a bit more carefully, but on the whole it has done a pretty good selection of that sky area. Now, that is just because of that missing tick in the snap to edges, and it can quite easily be missed when you're trying to make a sort of a selection of a larger area that is pretty much all the same colour. Obviously, if there was a lot of like trees or clouds in the way, that selection area wouldn't have been made so easily, but you get the idea that having snap to edges ticked will solve that problem quite easily. Now, the next sort of error mistake problem that I want to have a look at is sort of connected to the selection brush and other selections. Is if when somebody wants to duplicate that selection for whatever reason, it doesn't duplicate the way they expect it to. Now, if I use this same image and the selection brush again, and I select this sky again, there we go, and if I wanted to duplicate this selection, there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can either right click the layer itself and you've got duplicate, or if you come up to the layer menu you have duplicate, or you can have duplicate selection, and on the PC at least the shortcut is Ctrl plus J, but I'm going to do duplicate selection. So there you can see the new layer has just got the selected area. Let me press Ctrl and D to get rid of that selection area, and if I turn off the background, as you can see, it is just the area that I had selected, which in this case was the sky. So let me just close that down. Now, if I come to the stock tab, and in Pixabay I've already sort of set this up to look for a tree, so I'm going to click on this one and drag this in. Let me just close that. And if I use the selection brush on this area here, so I've just roughly done the sky area, and if I use that same option of duplicate selection, as you can see, the icon for this new layer is exactly the same as the previous one. So I'll press Ctrl and D to get rid of the selection area, and I'll turn off the background. And as you can see, although I only selected the sky, the whole image duplicated. Now let me just open that image again of the beach from where I live. Now as you can see, this is called background, and the area to the left has got this little dotted icon, which means that this is a pixel layer. Now this tree image, let me just turn, well, in fact let me delete that one. So we've just got this one. You can see now this one is called image, and the icon to the left has got this sort of, well, looks like a picture frame with somebody in it. So they are both technically image layers, pixel layers, but this one is a pixel layer and will allow you to select and duplicate areas, whereas this is an image layer and it won't allow you to select areas. So what you need to do is to convert anything that is an image layer into a pixel layer, and you can do this by right clicking, and you can probably do it from the menus at the top as well, but I'm just going to come down to here and rasterize, and that will convert this into a pixel layer. So now when I do this and select the top area, and if I do layer and duplicate selection, it should just have selected the area and duplicated the area I selected. So to make that selection and duplicate it, you must have it as a pixel layer. Now, yeah, there are other ways to get a image in and make it into an image layer rather than a pixel layer. I mean, sometimes from the stock tab, not always, but sometimes from the stock tab you can do that. But let me turn that off. Now if I use the place command, which is up here in file, and click place, and I navigate to that same image of Walton Beach and open. Now if I place this onto here, as you can see by the icon here, this is now an image layer. It's the same file from the same location on my computer, but that version is a pixel file layer, and this is an image layer. So the difference is that you can make selections and duplicate from this version, but not from this version. Now there are advantages. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what they are, but I think there are advantages to keeping a layer an image layer. But if you want to do certain things like duplicating a selection, it will have to be converted to a pixel layer at some point. So that is one sort of problem error that sort of trips people up quite easily. Now moving on to the next thing that trips people up quite often is when they use a brush, mainly the paintbrush tool, but it can happen to many of the other brushes like in paintbrush, and other brush tools like healing brush, things like that. But mainly the paintbrush tool, when they come to use it, instead of getting what they expect, which is like a circle, all they get is this crosshair. Now what is happening here is that maybe the last time they used it, now this is an extremely small file, I made it 20mm by 20mm, it's quite small. And the paintbrush tool, as you can see, the paintbrush on this, you can see the circle for the paintbrush, whereas on this much larger file, all you are getting is crosshairs. Now, if I come back to this small file, as you can see here, the pixel size of the width is 4mm. But because this is such a small document, that brush head at 4 pixels is visible. So, I can paint on here and you can see it. Now the thing here is that Affinity Photo remembers the size and sort of other settings of a brush tool from when it was last used. It doesn't always revert back to some sort of default size. It remembers that what was last used. So if on some previous project you used a very, very small brush and then you come to a new project which is on a much larger document, that 4 pixels is just not visible. You need to make it bigger to see the proper sort of circle for the brush head. Now you can do it by increasing the size from up here, and then you can now see that circle. Let me reduce that back down again, and in like 1 pixel all you get is that crosshair. Now you have also got keyboard shortcuts. Now next to the P on the keyboard there are the bracket keys, and the left bracket key will lower the size and the right bracket key will increase the size. So that is the right bracket key and the left bracket key, and they're probably a lot easier to use than coming up here. And if you look up here while I'm pressing these keys, you can see those numbers changing as I'm pressing the keys. So if you do have just a crosshair on particularly the paintbrush tool, but on any brush tool, just use the bracket keys to increase the size to get that circle or whatever shape it is to be visible. Now this next common problem, which also involves a brush tool, is that sometimes when people select a brush tool there is no colour showing in that circle area of where the brush is. Now this is something that I personally do and I do find annoying, but it happens more to me nowadays since they changed to version 2 and they put these new icons. I sort of struggle a bit with the newer icons. I understood the older ones much better, probably something to do with my age, but I sometimes select like for example the undo brush when I'm looking for the paintbrush tool. So when I'm on the undo brush there is no sort of colour in that circle, but if I select the right brush I now have that colour there. Now that's not the only reason why the colour will not be showing. Right, this next one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this layer and I will change the colour of this new layer to red. Now if I add a mask to this layer and select the paintbrush tool, as you can see where the paintbrush is, you can see the blue layer that is underneath, because the mask on this is white, but when I paint black onto this it will display the layer below. Now I come up to the actual layer itself and I'm going to paint onto the actual layer and not the mask. The colour, as you can see, was black, and if I select the mask the black will allow you to see through the mask of the red layer and see the blue layer below. That's pretty much how the mask works. Now, yeah, so when we are on this sort of mask layer, and up here in the top here we have protect alpha. Now if I put a tick in there, now when I'm painting, or I would assume that I'm painting onto the mask layer using the paintbrush tool set to black, you can no longer see through the mask. And I'm assuming, let me just paint here, see, and if I turn the mask off, nothing has happened. I'll turn the mask back on again, but take that tick out of protect alpha, I can now paint on there and see the blue underneath. So if it's a bit like the previous sort of problem where Affinity Photo remembers your previous sort of usage, and you may have for some reason have turned off protect alpha, and then the next time you come to do something, it remembers that and it will remove protect alpha or add protect alpha depending on which way you've done it. So if you are not seeing that colour through the paintbrush when you're sort of trying to paint onto a mask or whatever, just double check whether protect alpha has a tick in it, and then if you remove the tick, then hopefully that will then work. Now there is at least one other way where when you have the paintbrush selected and you've got the colour selected and there is still no colour showing through. Now this is another case of Affinity Photo remembering a previous setting, and that setting might be the blend mode for the brush. As you can see here, this is set on lighten and you cannot see the brush colour through the brush head, and in fact if I try painting, nothing happens. So if I bring this back up to normal, you can now see that colour through the brush head. So it is just a case of the blend mode. So these are 3 ways where you're not seeing the colour through the brush head, but for various different reasons. There may be other problems, but I think these are the 3 main ones that you sort of need to keep an eye on. Now this next one is not strictly speaking an error on the part of the users, it's more an error on the part of the people who make tutorials like me, be it written or video tutorials, is that they say sort of make a triangle shape, for example, and the new users don't know how to make shapes. Now again, this is partly down to Affinity Photo remembering what was last used, but in this toolbar that comes down the left here near the bottom, we have this one here which is for the shapes. Now the last one I used was an arrow shape, so if I select that I can draw an arrow. Let me just make that red so it's easier to see. But just below that arrow icon there's a little triangle, and if I click on that, there you have all the different shapes. So if the tutorial said like make a triangle, then it will change to the triangle and I can draw out a triangle quite easily. There's just a case if you see in a tutorial about make a shape of a certain type, be it triangle or rectangle, I think most people would have by default the rectangle, but I use arrows quite often in my written tutorials, so that was the last one I used. So that is basically and quickly how you can find a shape if it is mentioned somewhere in a tutorial. Now let me just delete these, and what I'm going to do now is, along a similar theme, let's say you're following a tutorial and it says like make a 12-pronged star. Now, you know, and then they don't really explain to you how they got to that shape, and then how they sort of altered the number of prongs in that star. So again, we come to this shape menu here, and you can either go for the star tool or the double star tool. I'm going to select the double star tool and draw that out. Sorry, and let me just position this here. Now, in the context bar along the top here, you can alter any and all shapes, and certain shapes will have more options than others, and this one has quite a few options. So as you can see here, we have 5 points, so you can alter the number of points in that star to whatever you want. So let's say 12, which might be what the tutorial asks you to make, and there's obviously more than 12 here. I'm not going to sit here and count them, but I think that's the longer prongs there, and you can alter the radius of those to whichever ones you want, and then you can alter the distance of the inner ones so they match the outer ones. You have many options here that you can alter with whatever shape. So let me delete that shape, and we will go with, let's try the donut tool. So just move this up here. So as you can see, you have different options here. So you can alter the size of the hole in the middle, and you can alter whether it's the whole circle or just part of that circle. Let me see if I can get this. I'll leave it there. And this one here is, and let's just go in the other way. So, and the angle, again, I'm not 100% certain what the difference is, but that's, you've got different options there. So whatever shape you pick, you can make alterations using the context toolbar that runs along the top. So whatever the tutorial might say to you, you may need to sort of get the tool that they've selected and then follow along with the context bar that is running across the top. For the last bit of this video, I just want to slightly return to a previous topic, which was like when you can't see the colour through the brush. Now this would be because there's no sort of pixel layer or a layer of any sort for it to paint on, because this is a new document, but as you can see in the layers menu, there is nothing there. Now just because you can't see the colour doesn't mean that it won't paint, but if I just click on brush, Affinity Photo will add that layer for you. Let me delete that. But if I've added a pixel layer previously, you can now see that colour through the brush head. So that just means that if you can't see the colour in the brush head, it might be just because there is no layer for it to paint onto, although Affinity Photo will add that layer. Now while I'm on the subject of this brush, this is another problem that I see quite often, and this is to do with the hardness setting. Now this is, at the moment, it's set on 100%. So if I paint that like that on 100%, and then if I reduce it down to 4%, as you can see, the brush is much softer. Now this brush is currently one of the basic brushes, but if I select, say, bubble, at the moment this still looks as though it's going to work. But if I actually select this brush and you keep an eye on that area up there, it becomes greyed out. So that means that I cannot alter the hardness from what it is set on, which is 80%. Now, this is not a problem that you have as such. It's not a user problem, it is a setting of Affinity Photo. In version 1 of Affinity Photo, I think all brushes, it came up here and you could alter the setting, but it actually had no effect whatsoever. I think you find hardness only really works on basics and maybe one or two other types of brushes. If I look at this image here, which I got from the Affinity forum, it does sort of explain, I'll give you time to read that at your own leisure, but it basically explains how Serif stopped the hardness from working on pretty much all the brushes apart from maybe basics and some of the others. So if hardness is greyed out, it is not an error with your setup or anything that you're doing wrong. It's going to happen to everybody in version 2 of Affinity Photo. So that is going to end this video. Now, I am currently working on a written version of this tutorial, but it will have 3 or 4 extras, little problems that I've sort of spotted over the years that people have. But as this video is now coming up to almost 30 minutes, I think I best stop the video now, and you'll have to wait for the written tutorial to see what I've added. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.